You're gonna need a pencil, pen, or a marker, piece of scrapped paper. This is a piece of poster board. I use this for a lot of pattern making. And then of course, your knife or blade. So for this style, there's going to be some trial and error, and you're probably going to go through a couple of patterns before you find one that you feel comfortable with transferring over to leather. So this first pattern is for the inside of the sheath. And then we're going to repeat this pattern for the outside of the sheath. Of course, we have to fit the inside portion first. And you know, why would I use 2 layers of leather? Well, it stiffens it up a lot, for one. And also, that's the surviving examples on the book that I happen to have, that I don't have right next to me. One of the reference books I have, it shows this construction. So I'm not sure if this is what they did or if they were just really good at fitting sheaths in the medieval ages, but we're here. This is how I do it. Now I want this sheath to go up to just under this nagle here. I want it to right up all the way there. So basically from wherever this blade starts and where the spine starts. If it's sticking out a little bit, that's fine. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it up to the edge of my piece of paper. Now, if you have some sort of guard or some other restraint kind of blocking that, or making it to where you don't get the knife right up against your paper, you're going to have a little bit of a misshapen pattern. So I'm going to get this up to the edge of the table, and I'll be starting this line right, like I said, where the edge and where the spine start. Another thing to keep in mind is that, and this pattern does work on these sort of shapes, or this style of pattern. Keep in mind though, it's not going to be symmetrical. The pattern will not mirror itself. So you'll have to know that it's going to fold over, and you have to imagine that our seam, if you will be running not from in line with the handle, but it's going to run in line with the center of the blade. And likely once you transfer this pattern to your leather, which you're going to want to oversize your pattern, you will have to trim, but that's okay. That's what you need to do to get a better fitment. So, can you not see that? Not really. Zoom out my crotch here. Just kidding. So you see what I mean? It's overhanging, and the reason I do that is because the shape of the knife will not allow me, or the handle will not allow me to lay it flat against the table and get a good pattern. So I'm just going to be holding this down. Oh, man, I don't want to cut into my pencil. Try not to anyways. I'm just marking roughly the outline of the blade. I can see that pretty well, but I will break my lead, scribble some darker lines for you at home. There you go. So that's the outline of our blade. Now, like I said again, I'm wanting this to follow not down the center of the inline. I'm not trying to follow in line with the handle. I'm trying to follow in line with the center of the blade. See, kind of, it's not, like I said, it's not straight on, it goes. So now you're gonna have to think about like what is our, like if like in sewing, our edge allowance. Obviously, you're going to need the distance from the center out and then some. So, and again, probably want a little bit of on the length of it here, just so you can have some wiggle room if you didn't get your measurements perfect. Now, a pair of dividers works really well for this. If you want to sit here and be like, okay, measure between, or I'll get my dividers on these 2 points, transfer it, and then follow out. That would be the smart thing to do. I think I can just eyeball it myself and erase the marks that I don't like. So I'm going to scribble here, just so I don't get confused. That's just for myself. And of course the edge allowance, right, because so what I'm saying is this distance here, I'm going to transfer out like that onto either side. So whatever shape following this is the piece that I'll cut out. You have to keep in mind, especially on a thicker blade, this is not a, you know, our knife is not a two-dimensional object, even though we're looking at it on a 2D plane. You have to keep in mind that there is a thickness to it. And of course, what wraps around the spine of it will need more material than what wraps around the edge, a small amount, but keep that in mind. If you want to, you could yeah, add the thickness of your blade onto it. You know, I feel like at that point you're doing too much math for this type of project. And of course, the piece, you know, our pattern here is not going to quite match up with the shape of the blade. And I'll scribble it in if you can't see it very well on the camera. You should see that pretty well, right? Again, it's folding, and then the seam is going to be down the flat of our blade here. But it's more of a torpedo shape that's going like that towards the edge, or towards the end, excuse me. But that should give us a pretty close start. Another way you could do this is if your leather is super supple and you don't care about having a ton of waste, which you probably do, but you could just fold your piece of leather around it and then clamp where you want the seam, mark, and then cut it. And that can achieve the same goal. I think I've seen somebody making a style like this online. I wish I remember which video that was. But you know, they didn't go into nearly as much detail about their process as I am going. So hopefully this will help somebody out there. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fiddle and double check and make sure that I'm happy with this. And then I'm going to cut it out, attempt to test fit it around our blade, see if there's any huge gaps or any huge overlaps. And then if I'm satisfied, I might have to do some more trimming or redraw the pattern. But once I am satisfied with that, I will transfer it to leather and then start the sewing. All right, we're back. So this is I know it's folded up right now. I was fitting it. Should have recorded that, I suppose. But placing it in there, I'm just folding the paper along it, seeing how it kind of interacts with it. And you'll see, like, towards the tip here, even though I gave it an edge allowance, it's, you know, it's still kind of hard to cover, and that would be kind of difficult to sew. If this inside piece is a little ugly, that's okay, as long as it's not bulky. Unless it's, you know, you want a ridge or some sort of under style. But I don't, so I want this to be pretty smooth along the face of it. I'm pretty happy with most of it. I will say though that towards the base, or really about from where my thumbs start and stop, there's too much overlap. And now I could transfer this straight to a piece of leather and then sew that. However, the issue will be then is that it'll be very loose, especially whenever we're going to be wetting this leather. It's you know, I want the sheath to not grab like hold on to it, but I want there to be some resistance whenever you're trying to pull it. This isn't a fighting knife, right? So ideally, you know, ideally you'll be working with this knife when you're doing field work or the likes, so you don't want it just falling out. So, and then there's ways around that. You can do ties and whatnot, but I'd like the sheath to be strong and stable for whoever ends up owning this knife. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to transfer this to a piece of leather, cut out from the piece of leather, and then we are going to wet form it and see how bad the overlap is on here. Now, of course, that means there's going to be some leather waste, but I feel like that's just kind of the process for this, unfortunately. So it sucks. But rather than wasting, you know, like putting this in the middle of a big square rectangle of leather, I can just do a tiny little offcut and not wasting a ton. So I'm gonna grab my leather, my tools, and wet it. Wet the leather, that is, and I'll be back to show you that. You're gonna want to wrap this knife in some sort of plastic. We're gonna be wrapping the wet leather around this while we're fitting it, and that will rust your blade. It's just how it is. I don't know what they would have done historically. Maybe some sort of, you know, like dipped it in beeswax or paraffin or some other coating, or maybe they didn't care and then they just polished it again. I kind of doubt that last one. But I'm just gonna take some shrink wrap, very thin layer. You don't want this to be adding a ton of mass to it and making it to where it's like, oh, well, it's tight, and then you take the shrink wrap off and you put it in there and then, right, it's too loose. So I'm gonna go grab those things and we'll be right back. We are back. So I've got this wrapped in some plastic wrap, shrink wrap, whichever one you have will work. Wax it. Whatever you need to do to protect your blade. I've got my pattern unwrinkled. X-Acto knife, or I just got an Alpha blade here, whichever works for cutting your leather. The leather you should be using should be thin enough to use even like a pair of scissors to cut. This here is goat skin, if I remember correctly. You can use cow skin, whatever skin you want, just as long as it's very, very thin and supple. That's a lot better for this. You don't want to, you know, a really heavy, thick piece. I mean, these blades are already heavy enough to carry in the traditional, you know, or in the medieval fashion, right? So I don't like very heavy things on my belt. Now, you might wonder, like, you know, should I be using the, I can't remember what they call it, the finish side or the inside of the hide. I use the inside, and the reason being is that makes for a smoother pull. And then also, whenever we're doing the decorative outside portion, the second layer, two of those inside layers really helps hold them together. And then again, like they're not actually going to be sewn or glued together, but they will be bound. Like, yeah, you'd have a very difficult time getting them apart once we have it sewn. So this would be a very good time to use any leather pieces that have blemishes or are wrinkly or ugly offcut pieces. I think for myself, it would make the most sense to use this portion, like the edge of the hide for this. Because the wrinkles are a little unsightly. This is not an exact science. Like I said, like you are going to have to trim and stretch pieces to get these to fit. I'm sure you could get a beautiful pattern that would fit exactly to whatever knife you have, but your leather will not be uniform. Guaranteed. Will not be uniform. I'm actually going to add just a bit more of an allowance. Marker actually might work better for this. I'm going to add a bit more of an allowance towards the tip. It was a little small on the paper. And if that ends up looking stupid and too big, then just have to trim it back. There we go. I apologize if you can't see that very well. It's more for me anyways. Of course, it's a little blunted, but this leather's so thin, it won't be a problem. I say that. I'm gonna go change out my blade. Make sure you have sharp tools, people. You know, I've got a lot of these random tiny pieces. I'm really not sure what to use them for. I hate throwing them away because, you know, I'm not some hippie or anything, but I hate animal products going to waste. You know, I suppose you could make a one-layer sheath like this if you were more careful about the piece that you use and you wanted to keep this nice and clean. But I just like, ever since I got a Todd Cutler 14th century dagger and I didn't take it apart, but I stared at the sheath for a very long time trying to figure it out. And I'm pretty confident that's what he does. It's 2 layers, and that's what it saw in the books on that London excavation of knives and sheaths. At least that's how I interpret it anyways. I'm going to go wet this and just run it under the sink until it's supple, and then we will see how it fits. And again, I just ran this under the sink, faucet, same piece, just a little darker. Get it lined up to where we want it. And we're going to kind of fold across. If you have clamps or the likes, that might be useful for this. Yeah, just as I thought. Yeah. So, let's see how much the water helps retain the shape. It's too much materials on this side, so I'm going to take our scissors and very carefully trim off, a little bit at a time. That's it, just a little fiber of it, really. Set this. Yeah, still a bit too much overlap. So this time I'm going to take it off of the side. I didn't make a cut in a very, very small amount. I just want these edges butted up against each other. And forewarning, unless you have experience working with leather and doing this sort of fitting, you're probably going to make a few pieces of scrap leather. But that's okay. That is part of the process. It's part of getting better at, well, getting better at everything, really. So I stopped a bit short of the tip because the tip, I had to add material to it. I don't need to really take too much off from up there. So if you can see, I'll even zoom in. we'll kind of go down the section. These pieces are butted, but I could, you know, there's still play. That's fine. The leather will shrink. I think, you know, if I really squeezed them tight, I might have to take a bit more off, but we'll go through the entire blade and kind of see before rather than taking it all off the entire length of the piece. We're gonna have to go portion by portion. Yeah. So up towards the tip, pretty good, and down at the base, but there's a couple of spots in the middle here that are still a bit too large. So, yeah, down at the base. Yeah, so you see right here, I'm kind of pulling and it's butted just perfectly. So I'm gonna take a little strip off of this piece. Still just a tiny bit of overlap. And this might seem really frustrating, and it kind of is. But for a good looking and sturdy sheath, it is worth it. So even butting these up like this, it doesn't have, like, a little bit of a gap is even acceptable. Again, this is the underside of it. I'd rather have a tiny gap than overlap. So again, got a pretty decent bit of overlap here. Just taking slivers off at a time. And you'll find, like, this leather stretches so easily, it being this thin and supple. You're probably, things that were butted, you know, fiddling with it, you're probably causing them to overlap. And if you mess up pretty terribly on this, don't beat yourself up and don't stress about it, because you get to do it again on the outside. All right, we're almost there. I probably took close to 1/4 inch off either side, so about an 1/8 inch, well, not either side, in total. So you could say about 1/4 inch in total of material removed. And again, a gap at this stage is not the end of the world. It more matters on side number 2. But at this point, I'm happy with the distances on it. So while this thing is still wet and easy to punch, I am going to go out to the garage, take you out there with me. We're going to punch up and down the length of this with some stamps. Going to be punching a lot more holes than actually necessary. Now, of course, you want this thing to be tight and sturdy. You don't like, I don't want to try to do this in 15 stitches, right? I want it to hold itself together very well. So we're gonna go out to the garage and get to punching. Really won't be too much to say with this. It's gonna be a lot of punching. There's no rhyme or reason to it. Just be careful with this style of punch. The bladed sort of sections can tear if you get too close to the edge. If you do, your piece isn't scrapped, but just keep in mind. And of course, eyes and ears, whatnot. pause here. I'm starting at the tip, or at the bases of the sheath, and then going towards the tip. If I'm offset down here, it might make it hard to make a clean connection here, and this end matters a lot less than it looking nice at the top, even for this inside piece. There we are. We're gonna re-wet it and then probably start sewing on it and show you what that kind of looks like. So I have punched all the holes on the piece of leather and re-wetted it. Honestly, probably a little too wet. And this is just gonna help with the sewing process. Next thing you're gonna need to grab is some needle and thread. This is some artificial sinew, which honestly doesn't shrink the best, but it's what I've used. And we're going to get 2 needles. Those hook needles probably are better for this. I had one, couldn't tell you where it went. And ideally you could probably do the whole length of this in one go, but I'm just gonna do a wingspan of thread, and we'll have to knot it off as we go. But I believe this is called the saddle stitch. What people called it back in the day, I am not sure. But it involves a needle on either side. You could probably get away with just one of the curved one and do one side zigzagging down the length and back around, but this is easier for me. It's easier to keep it tight too. And we're going to be sewing the blade into the sheath here. And again, that's why we keep the plastic on it. The incidental touch from earlier when we were shaping the leather or fitting the leather, not as impactful as it, being enclosed around a damp surface, overnight, because that's about what I'm gonna leave it for. Now, if I remember correctly, I started from the base here. I'm gonna see how good I actually punched the leather. There we go, jeez. And of course, punching it and then wetting it more has probably closed those holes up just a tad. And you're off camera, Nathan, come on. So I'm just gonna take these both in one hand and kind of even up. And then we are going to, I'm gonna go ahead and put a knot here just to set it and make it kind of easier on us here. I apologize, my recording setup might not be the best for this. But evening out our threads, or our thread. There we are. And then I'm going to do right side, left side, right side, left side, right side, down the length of it. It's unlikely I'm gonna do every hole. I'm just gonna kind of go whatever looks the most even, just to save on time. I mean, of course you could do every single piece here and then make a very sturdy inner sheath, but I think that might be overkill, honestly, for what this blade will be used for and the life of it. Now I said I'm going right over left over. I'm not sure if it matters if you go in from the top or go in from under, as long as it's consistent down the length of it. So figure out which one you like and then just stick with it. I'm approaching the end of this here, and you can kind of see it's starting to have a twist on it, and it might look a little ugly at the very tip. That's okay. At least for what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a shape for it. And also, there's another piece going over this. So don't fuss too much if your inner sheath is looking a little weird or wonky. I mean, even my line is not perfect with it, right? So it's like... So just get it secure and tight, and that's more important than the aesthetics of this right now. Now I just kept going until I was past the tip of it. I've knotted it off securely, and that's the inner sheath portion done. The outside portion is quite a bit more complex. I'm gonna have to let this dry and then make a pattern for the outside piece and show you all of the different tricks to that. But as it is right now, this wet sheath, or inner sheath, right, there's a little bit of resistance involved. I'm gonna leave this in here, let it dry out till it's its normal color, and then we will get to making the outside portion of it. Take two here, jeez. Just having a huge brain fart. Okay, so this isn't finished drying, but that's okay. It's dry enough to the touch. I probably shouldn't try to sew onto this piece anymore, but I can still go ahead and cut out the piece and get it prepped for whenever this is dry. So I'm wanting the seam to be on, so the outside sheath, I want the seam to be running along the side that is opposite to the nagle, because I'm thinking, you know, if you're wearing this, you don't want the nagle rubbing into you. So this will be our outside facing portion. Don't want a seam on it. And then I want the outside, or the soft, smooth side of the leather facing, because I'm going to tool that and make that look nicer. So normally I would make another pattern for the outside sheath, but since I had to trim so much off of this, off pretty evenly, I'm gonna go ahead and use the same pattern as before. I did a dry fit onto this one, but if you're not certain, you can always repeat the process of the inside sheath, but just keep in mind about where your seam is going to be. So I know this pattern like this will give me a seam along this side. So I'm going to flip my knife and flip my pattern. So if you can see, that follows the shaping of what it needs to be. So it's going to, whatever I cut this out of will place the seam on this back side without the nagle. So I've got my leather laid out here. Smooth side is facing down. And just take your time thinking about this. I've had to scrap quite a few pieces of leather because I've gotten a rush where I'm tired like I am right now, and I make some mistakes. So I checked the front side of this. I know that's smooth and free of any major defects. Just a mental note for myself. All right. Hopefully I'm not kicking myself. I've had to take this is the second take on this. Again, I'm mostly tracing this out for myself. I'm sure you can get the idea of drawing out. I said it once, I'll say it again. Marker's probably better for this. But I'm sure you get the idea of tracing out, oh my goodness, a pattern. That looks good. Now this nagel is kind of in the way, so it might be better to do it off the table edge. But you can see, even with this piece dry, they don't quite meet, but I think once it has been wetted and I'm pulling the thread tight onto it, it'll go through okay. And again, when it gets down to the tip here, it doesn't, like, it's not gonna look super pretty, which is why I think they put shapes over it. Which is optional. You could just tie it off, it'd be completely functional. But the next step would be, like I said, you know, let this dry out thoroughly. Then I will wet this piece, do one more test fit around this, and if this looks good, go do the punches around the perimeter, just like this, and a few other steps. Like I'll be making some slits at the top here to, you know, for a strip to be tied, you know, so you can tie it to a belt. Even though, you know, there's plenty of examples where they don't have any ties, it's just shoved into a belt. And then I will also, after confirming the fit on this, tool this somehow. And again, that's going to be up to you. You could just leave it plain if you want, but I think some sort of design might be nice. I'm thinking about putting my logo or my maker's mark somewhere along here, but we shall see, and I'll jump to that once this is prepped for sewing. All right, we're back on the next day here. The dagger is off screen. It is dry. This is the outside sheath portion. All I've done to it is make sure it fits, and then I punch the holes for the sewing all around. So now comes to a sort of fiddly part, which is, you know, the decorating. Before you start decorating on your piece, you should really, well, one, practice some different, you know, I just got these tools, but I've done some very simple tooling in the past, but practice your design on some scrap pieces of the same material. Now, I'm not doing any particular design on these. I'm just playing around with the set I got off of Amazon, which is you can get a whole, basically everything you need for maybe $15 or so. I'm sure these aren't the highest quality, but it's kind of hard to beat the number I got. And most of them are useful or will be used at some point. If you know for a fact, it's like, well, I only really want this flower one. Well, just go to Tandy or the likes, and think they sell these for $3 or so. But not a product review right now. I apologize. So I just kind of wetted these pieces and then hammered on them to see how they go. Some of the stamps I wanted to use don't really show up as well as I'd like, such as this checkerboard pattern here, right? I think that's what I'm gonna go with. And then scoring the lines will help with the contrast on it. But it's gonna be slow going for sure. And I'll need to make sure that my piece stays wet. You can get a bowl or just run out of the sink again whenever it starts to dry out. But before we start the decorating business, we need to think about how we're going to mount this onto a belt. Like I said earlier, some historical pieces, they didn't have any sort of ties, but I want ties on this one. Now, this is a sculpting tool of some sort. It's got a blade. You could use an X-Acto knife for the likes, but I found that on a test piece, it worked pretty well for getting the size of slit that we need to run the cord through. So you have to try to think where you want this cord to be. I'm gonna want mine pretty high up. No, not a whole lot of sense at putting it, midway down. So I'm not really measuring here. I'm just gonna eyeball it. And the way it's gonna work is like a belt loop. So we'll have thin pieces of the sheath and then longer pieces that it goes through or over. It doesn't have to be the most secure thing ever. Just try to keep in mind the spacing on it, right? You don't want you want it to look good, right? It should be a pretty thin, probably the cord should be about as thick as this thing is wide, which I think is about 1/2 inch, or no, sorry, 3/8 of an inch. And again, we have to imagine these two sides are gonna be paired up next to each other. And all I'm doing is just pushing and rotating around, and that's started to open that up. Yeah, we have a tiny little slit there now. I'm going to try to space it out as evenly as I can by eye. All right, that's your next one. So if we had a cord running through this, so it'd be dangling kind of odd. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put another opening right there and right there. I imagine you could probably even incorporate this into your design, whatever you end up doing on yours. I'm gonna make these about 1/3 longer than what they are. That even might be too much. And the reason for that is if I try to put in a 3/8 inch cord into that slit, it'd be very difficult to do without tearing up the leather. Right, so if you can imagine, I'll grab an awl here. Right, our cord will run in to there. So if we're running it into like that, which I think that's gonna be the easier way to do it, you'll have a strip of the cord running across the outside of your sheath. And that is completely fine. But I think 2 little slits like that will be plenty good. And of course, you probably don't want to do any design on these pieces here. Well, for one, they're going to be tucked behind like so. So I wouldn't get too caught up in what that looks like up there. I'm gonna grab the dagger. You can kind of see. Now, unfortunately, those straps will kind of be on the spine and the blade. There's not a lot of real estate on this sheath. It's a pretty thin knife, or not very wide. So that might make it a little difficult whenever we are putting the cord on here, but nothing to worry about. But I know that I have all of this real estate here to start doing designs. Now this is just my maker's mark on a handle. I use this for hot forging, but I have it oriented so I know which way my mark will be going. So I just kind of want to put that towards the top somewhere. Kind of in the middle, I think would be a good little spot for it. And that's probably not even really showing up for you. Let's zoom in. And I've got that same mark on the blade, but I always forget to mark my stuff. And then it's also important to keep in mind, if you decide to do a shape on yours, you know, this might not, it might be covered by a piece of metal or whatever your material is. So don't go too crazy intricate down here if you know that it's going to be covered by a shape. I haven't made a shape yet for it, so I'm just going to do a pattern down it. But I think it would be good to define our lines where we're actually going to be worrying about the pattern. And I'm just going to kind of mark. I don't want to cut this more if I don't have to. And it'll be kind of difficult to see at first, especially with the leather wet, and you at home most certainly won't be able to see it. But once the stuff dries out some, it'll be much bolder. Just taking a very small probe here. I'm gonna just experiment with running it along that. See if I can open it up some more. Yeah, you can kind of see that. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to very gently score the leather and box in the spot that I actually want to lay my designs on. Honestly, this probe might be enough to do that. Yeah. You can see I did not get it even on either side in the slightest, but that's all right. The close-ups of the surviving examples, except on like the most bespoke stuff, you see, even on the bespoke stuff, you'll see mistakes and errors all over the place. Like a very common one that I've seen is hash marks up and down it, and the spacing and the straightness of the lines never consistent. So hopefully that will make you feel a little bit better whenever you're doing it at home. It's not going to be, it's not machined, right? It's not a precision practice, and it doesn't need to be. It might help to have something backing it underneath. I had a scrap piece of leather. I tried. I've seen some people do that. I didn't notice any difference in it myself. But so what I'm going to do now is do our checkerboard pattern. Now this one, and I'm a complete novice with leatherworking stuff here, right? This one is at an incline, right? So it's not a completely square thing. It's kind of running, exaggerated, of course, but it's running like that. And so I'm not going to be placing it straight perpendicular to the camera, like this to the camera. I think you're supposed to punch it like that. And I believe I'll have to sit here and think about it, about which one will catch the light better. I think if I run the deeper end, like here, that would make more sense to catch light if it's coming down onto the object. But of course, you should you should do a test piece at home and let it dry, not doing what I'm doing, because I'm a silly person. But I'm gonna go wet this some more and start punching it and laying it out, and I'll come back with a little bit of progress for you. All right, a little update. So I've made a flub. Luckily, it's gonna be on the back side of the sheath, but I placed 2 dark squares right next to each other. I mean, I also have another one right here where the lines are a bit too thin. It was originally too big. Now I made it 2 small lines, but that's okay. That's part of it. Remember, even on some of King Henry VIII's armor, there were flaws like this at least. So what I did was I found the center. I would score 2 lines, go down, score 2 lines, go down, score 2 lines. Maybe not the best way to do it. It's taken on a bit of a curve, but kind of follows the knife, so it's not the worst thing in the world. Experimenting on a piece you're gonna sell. You gotta love it. But I liked how that really helped fill out the pattern. So maybe if you were to use a marker or something that you can get rid of off of it and just used a ruler to lay out your center line and then went off with the rest, that'd be better. But all the squares are scored now, and I'm just trying my best to fill in each one. And it's just like that. I mean, just a couple of taps, trying to go from left to right. That looks good. So now what we'll do is the same thing before. Line up really well, or try to line up the best we can, and sew down the length of it. And I'll be back when that is done. All right. So I've finished stitching the back side, and I've just snipped off the fiddly bits at the end. So for the first piece, I decided to keep the dagger in to where it retained its shape. I think it's got enough mass now that I'm going to remove the knife from the sheath, and while it's still a little damp, we're going to fit a cord for it. So ideally, I'll just lay this flat while it's drying, and it'll really shrink up on itself. So that way, whenever I take the wrap off of this, and this is completely dry, I can reinsert it, and it'll have a good grip onto it. Now, to make the cord, you can buy spools of leather, but I find that those don't hold up very well. It's too supple or too felted, and you don't need a huge length of this. I'm thinking, just enough to really tie itself to a belt. Trying to see if there's a straightish piece on here, and there isn't really, but that's okay. That even might be too thick. No, that should be fine. And if you want, you could score a straight line and then cut a piece out, but I don't think anybody's gonna notice while it's tied up in a knot or the likes on somebody's belt that the piece is a little interestingly shaped, you know, right? I cut that out from a curve, but holding it straight, I can still see some variance in the shape, but I think that'll be just fine. And then to start these, you can kind of take whatever all shaped object, open up the slits. Just want to feed that the other way. Even it up. I just want the cord to be relatively uniform. Yeah, there we go. Gonna reseat our knife temporarily. Just kind of check. All right, you could knot that around, and maybe a cleaner knot, but you could knot that around a belt pretty easily. Doesn't take a whole lot. And this is, again, this is just the same material I used on the sheath itself. Just a bunch of goat skin. Pretty inexpensive at Hobby Lobby, especially if you come in with a coupon. They used to have these great coupons that would give you 40% off one item. I'd go and buy one thing at a time. But I think they've gotten rid of that. But you can kind of see what the finished result will look like here, as it's this side, the one I've been handling a lot, it's been drying up. I think it looks all right for how much I'm going to sell it for. So next, if you want, you could put a chape on this. That is a bit more complex, and I'll probably just do that in a future video, because this is already involving quite a few skills as it is. But a brief rundown on it, much like how you shaped the pattern for the sheath, you can fiddle and fuss with that to try to get that out of a piece of brass, copper, steel, whatever. But that's a lot of hammering and fitting that I don't think is necessary for it at this point. So hopefully this was informative. I know I did a lot of yapping, but thank you for watching. I appreciate it.